All right. So, Igor, you've written about this yesterday in the Birmingham News, the headline in the #1 newspaper in Alabama, in big, big, bold print. Stand for decency, reject Roy Moore. What difference will that make? There were 2 other papers that did the same.
That's right. The 3 papers, they're the largest newspapers in the state, owned by the same company, who put up this banner editorial at the top telling people to vote for Doug Jones. And I don't know. I'm skeptical whether it's going to have some kind of a backlash and encourage more of his supporters, to vote. So I'm unsure.
What do you think?
Certainly almost every prominent newspaper editorial endorsed Hillary Clinton.
That's right.
And explicitly said not to. In more sorry, I mean it across the country. I mean more about the relevance of newspaper editorials. Now I know in local races, state level races, they can still have some influence because more people do read the paper, but I pay attention to their local paper, I should say. But I don't think that they have the same sway. And I think, as Igor said, there's so much disdain for the media that I almost wonder if it has a reverse effect.
Well, I was on MSNBC yesterday, and the woman ahead of me was a Trumper. Well, yes, she was a Trumper, but she was a Roy Moore supporter, so-called evangelical Christian. And she was making the point, the argument she kept coming back to, it was her talking point was, we people in Alabama don't want them people in New York and Washington to tell us how to vote, right? So she was making it this is us versus them.
Right.
I could see that the more people will take this too and make it us versus them, meaning this is the media trying to tell us what to do. They think we're dumb, right?
So the main counterpoint that Roy Moore,
fair.
well, some of us more than others.
Wow, damn, look at me like that.
I have some hot tea in my hand, and I'm ready to use it.
The main point that Roy Moore and his supporters have been driving throughout this whole thing has been, the Washington Post, elitist coastal newspaper telling us what to do. Well, here we've got 3 newspapers, local newspapers saying don't vote for Roy Moore.
I also will say though that the Post obviously has been at the forefront of some of these revelations, but so has AL.com, the local paper. But somehow I think people have managed to just compartmentalize voters, in Alabama, and just only fixate on the Post. And I think Moore and Trump Moore and other people who are his supporters have been using a strategy to really make it seem like it's only the Washington Post.
Even if it's Alabama publication, right? I think they make that argument. It's the media.
Right.
One other thing to point out, just not in Alabama politics, right? Like Birmingham is different than the rest of Alabama in the sense that Birmingham is cosmopolitan in their eyes. It's the big city. And they think that, there is a high percentage of African Americans that live in Birmingham. They just elected this very, very progressive Democratic Socialist mayor, Woodfin, in Birmingham. And so, the rest of Alabama doesn't necessarily look at Birmingham as, how things are, truly reflective of the rest of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I think that there are a lot of people who are just ignoring the fact that Roy Moore could still win this.
Yeah.
And I predicted he would early on. I'm not so sure about that now that there's been just this onslaught of women that continue to come out and say these things. But, he could still win.
What I found interesting is that he sort of copied the Donald Trump playbook.
Yep.
Totally.
On Friday, he put on stage, I think, 20 women who came out and testified on his behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very similar to what Donald Trump did in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the women there described him in unusual terms. Her name is Gina Boggs, again, a so-called Christian evangelical.
I have found his character to be only one thing, and that is godly.
Godly.
He cares more about what God says and thinks than anything else in his life.
So when the one girl said she was 14 and he took his clothes off and made her touch his penis through his underwear, that's her definition of godly. You just can't even imagine people who stand up for this guy. At any rate, let's move on.